Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to come and speak with you. Nigel asked me to speak a little bit about what's going on with inclusive growth, and also a little bit about how the voluntary sector can contribute to shaping this agenda. I said to him, I'm not sure the answer to that question, so I've got a few ideas which I'd quite like to share with you and hear what you've got to say on that. As Mike said, the Inclusive Growth Analysis Unit is a partnership between the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and the University of Manchester. We were set up a year ago to try and make sure that poverty reduction and the reduction of inequality were at the centre of ambitions for the growth of the Greater Manchester economy and the conversations around devolution, and then also to try and provide some independent resource to helping to understand those issues and come up with some evidence-based solutions. And since then, a year ago, it's kind of everything's gone mad on inclusive growth. Nobody talked about inclusive growth 18 months ago, and now it's a thing. So I'm sorry if you've heard me say this before, but for those who haven't, I'll just talk a little bit about what I think it is. This is one of the things we've learned from our work in Greater Manchester is that people use this term in very different ways, but many people are quite comfortable working with this sort of definition, even if they want to stretch it in different directions. So this is how the OECD describes inclusive growth. It's economic growth, and I've emboldened economic growth. This is fundamentally about the economy that creates opportunities for all segments of the population and distributes the dividends of increased prosperity, and this is another important point, both in monetary and non-monetary terms, fairly across society. And I think, again, broadly speaking, there are two major spheres of activity that are included in that. You know, if we're thinking about what would you do, one is making the economy itself more inclusive, and the other, which I'll come on to in a minute, is about connecting more people to the opportunities that already exist and might be created through future growth. So this making the economy more inclusive, this is the point that we need to have an economy where work pays and is a route out of poverty, and where work provides some kind of meaningful and valued activity, where there are high quality jobs and secure jobs, and you've got an opportunity to progress and develop. And I think that means three things really. One is probably thinking about the Greater Manchester situation. We probably need a stronger economy. We've got a lot of, about nearly a quarter of people in Greater Manchester are in a job that would be officially counted as low paid. We need a stronger economy, probably, to make more productive firms that can afford to raise those wages. You can't just say to employees you've got to raise wages and provide better opportunities. Too many of our firms are bumping along the bottom, competing on low cost, and we probably need stronger management and more investment and more innovation in our firms. So we probably need a stronger economy to deliver some of this. We also need a fairer economy, and it's kind of an unknown quantity, but nationally we know, and internationally, but also in this city, a lot of the value of firms will be taken out at the top for the benefit of shareholders. We've seen widening pay ratios and so on. So part of this is about distribution of money within firms, and partly it's about a more balanced economy. We probably need an economy which is less dependent on multinational corporations responsible to shareholders, and a stronger local economy where more of the money is going back into circulating within the local economy. So many of the things that I've put on here about that more balanced kind of economy, more social enterprise, more support for startups and small businesses, using the power that we've got in our big institutions through their procurement processes to stimulate local firms and build local supply chains. Perhaps more effort to build an economy based on co-op or mutual models rather than on shareholder capitalism. More inclusive HR practices. I mean, all of the stuff that we're familiar with about racial discrimination, disability discrimination, and so on. all comes into this kind of, making the economy more inclusive area, and then thinking about how we can recycle the wealth that we've already got in the city, things like social investment bonds or regional banks, not depending on a national model of finance to have the same effect anywhere. So there's a whole bunch of things that are being talked around about a more inclusive economy. And then perhaps more familiar territory, perhaps making more efforts to join up people who are currently marginalised from existing economic opportunities. And the way that this is kind of being cast, I think, in the inclusive growth language is about thinking about the social investments that are needed to connect people to economic opportunities. So a decent vocational education and training system, using apprenticeships effectively, all the support things that enable people to actually work, affordable childcare and elder care, a lot of attention around better health, and also, I should have said on the previous slide, making sure that work doesn't make health worse, things around employment support, affordable housing in the right places, as Nigel was saying. This is one of the big lessons we learned from London. We've got no affordable housing in a city dependent on the service economy, so those essential workers are commuting from 40 miles away at cost. It's not a sustainable model. What is new here? There's probably nothing new here in the way that people in this room understand the world and what needs to be done, but this is a reframing of the kind of conversations that are being had both at national and local policy level, I think, in three particular ways. So one is the emphasis that's being put on different economic models as a way to economic and social inclusion. For a long, long time, I think we've had economic development over there, emphasising the size of the economy and growth at all costs, and then we've had social policy running around trying to pick up the pieces of an uninclusive economy. And this inclusive growth, just sticking together the terms inclusion and growth in one term, is starting to say that we have to look at the economy. We can't see these things as separate. We will never get a more inclusive society if we have an uninclusive economy. Second one you can't quite see because it's got some funny things stuck over the top. That says social investments are central to economic success. So suddenly we're allowed to say that spending on welfare broadly, I don't mean the benefit system, social security, I mean social welfare more broadly, isn't seen as a drag on the economy, something that's pulling down productivity, but it's seen as central to economic success. If we're going to increase productivity, we need to have people who are healthy, who are well housed, etc., and well trained. And thirdly, sticking those two things together, it's not something the public sector can deliver. So you have to start thinking about inclusive growth being a shared agenda. Employers are actually critical. At a city level, the anchor institution, we're talking about the large employers who are grounded in the city, have a huge role to play in their procurement, employment practices, and so on. Politicians, citizens themselves, our behaviour as individual consumers within the economy. So it starts to make us think differently about how you would lead such an agenda in a city and who's responsible. So potentially quite different approach to economic development and investment, even to the point of saying, I was talking last week about how would you measure success here. Traditionally we measure the success of economic development by the size of the economy. And here we're trained to people who are making economic development decisions. You should measure the success of your economy by the health and happiness of the people, not by the size of the economy. A more fundamental shift potentially to social investment rather than patching up problems. We would really need to think of a further breaking down of policy silos and spending boundaries. Should we be spending more money on health and less on transport, for example, the kind of things, and as I said, different kind of city leadership. So potentially it's quite new It's also, like I said, it's a thing now. Everybody's talking about inclusive growth. Next week you'll see a report for the National Commission for Inclusive Growth run by the RSA. There's an all-party parliamentary group. Some unlikely candidates are talking about inclusive growth. The OECD, the World Economic Forum, the IMF. These are not the sort of people who you would be expecting to talk about these things. There's a new inclusive economy unit at DCMS. Theresa May never says the words inclusive growth, but she says these things. And just importantly for here, inclusive growth is now the core theme of the new Greater Manchester strategy. So even if you think this is like not a new thing and it's all a load of froth, it's a load of froth that's here right now. I'm part of it. It may not be here in a couple of years, who knows? I think there's some good reasons why this might not stick around. One is just now everybody's on inclusive growth. It's become one of those motherhood and apple pie terms. Someone described it last year as a vanilla term. Like every kind, you can't say growth now without saying inclusive, unusually inclusive and sustainable growth. So lots of things that one wouldn't recognise as inclusive and sustainable growth are being called it. Another danger is that people like the IMF and OECD and World Economic Forum, who cynically one might think have no real intention of changing the model, the economic model on which the world runs, recognise they need to say this thing, but they don't actually mean to change anything. They can say we're being more inclusive, but it might not mean anything. Those things are possibly true. Some other dangers, I think, on the one hand, and I can see this happening a little bit here, is that it's starting to be positioned as only about raising productivity. So we're having inclusion for growth, but we're not really thinking about the balance of priorities or the distribution of benefits of growth. So it becomes, we need healthier people so we can have more, we can make the economy bigger. Which is true, but not the end of the story. But on the other hand, I think it could be picked up as a kind of reincarnation of social inclusion. It's all about the social, and a failure to recognise that first point that I said, that we have to change the economy. So I think there's dangers of this fizzling out into nothing. But at the minute, it seems to be a way of framing aspirations and strategies for cities. So I was saying to colleague earlier, I've sort of decided to be naive about this and just say, well, here it is, so let's try and shape it and make it how we want to. So here are just 3 points, I think, about how the voluntary sector relates to this. I may have just really got this wrong, so you tell me. So the 3 areas, I think, where the voluntary sector can try and connect and shape this. One is the role of the voluntary sector as an economic actor. There's quite a lot that the voluntary sector does. If we're interested in inclusive growth from the bottom up and a more balanced economy, there's quite a lot of voluntary sector activity goes into fostering microeconomies in a way, through both, through education, connecting people to work, supporting startups, supporting social enterprise, building people's confidence, making self-employment sustainable, etc., etc. A second one is just the social enterprise model for delivery of what we might call foundational economy. A lot of our low pay problem happens in things like, in the care sector is a major one, and I think there's a really big conversation to be had here about whether we could, colleagues at university talk this about repatriating care from out of a profit-making model back into a community-delivered model through social enterprise. That could be a potentially very big area. And also the role of the voluntary sector as an employer. Both voluntary sector and social enterprise organisations are much more likely to have inclusive employment practices and employ people who are traditionally furthest from the labour market. So, in a sense, the bigger the voluntary sector, the better for an inclusive economy, but also as a model to other employers. So that's one. The second one is seeing the voluntary sector as one of those social investments in an inclusive economy. So the work that the voluntary sector does to build the individual capacities of people who might potentially be doing paid work, and in the massive effort of the voluntary sector to provide all of that infrastructure on that slide there that actually enables paid work to happen for many people. And a point that has been made to me quite a lot in the last couple of weeks is the role of the voluntary sector, not just as a deliverer, but in building people's confidence networks and social capital to enable them to access opportunities. We've heard some of those examples today. So I think that this is a very big area. And then the third one, if you take this, and if the city takes the idea of a shared agenda around inclusive growth seriously, there's no one better enabled to make that happen than the voluntary sector through its role in connecting people in and across communities. Often, I think the role of the voluntary sector is officially sort of not terribly visible. So many of you will have connections with local employers and will understand the motivations of local employers for getting involved in civic activity and funding, and I think that's a knowledge base that needs to be tapped, and seeing local employers as central to this agenda. Voluntary sector reaches the people and speaks to the people that public sector often doesn't reach, and enables their voices to be held. And again, the voluntary sector is a model. We've been talking about systems leadership. Who spoke about systems leadership? Yeah, we've been talking about systems leadership for inclusive growth across the city, and it's a model of distributed leadership and so on. We've already got that happening in the voluntary sector and driven by the voluntary sector, so it's a kind of model for an inclusive growth leadership. So I think I can see that a case can be made. Again, I'm speaking at Greater Manchester level rather than a Manchester level. I can see a case being made for more investment of public money in voluntary sector activity to support inclusive growth from the bottom up, thinking about inclusive economies. And I can also say, well, if we don't know how to do that, that the voluntary sector should be a leader of some new pilots and demonstration projects on how that could be done, because the voluntary sector does join up the economy and society at a local level in ways that the public sector doesn't do. And also that the voluntary sector should be seen as the lead agent, really, in leading civic engagement around this agenda. If this is new territory, who is well placed to develop an understanding of what needs to happen and how to make it happen? So I can see these. I'm not convinced these cases are yet made, but I think there's some mileage there. Here's the dose of realism. Can't stay naive for more than 20 minutes at a time. We haven't got many local powers yet devolved, so we talk about city agenda around inclusive growth, still limited powers as to what we can do, still living in politics of austerity, there's no new money. Talk about inclusive growth, but who's to say there's going to be any growth? So, I mean, a lot of people say the agenda should be much more about redistribution, and we should stop kidding ourselves there's going to be some growth. We certainly aren't seeing a nationally led overhaul either of our economic values or our public spending priorities at this stage. And locally, but this is an opportunity as well. We're still feeling around for some actual policies and strategies. It's still, to be made a real thing. So this is where I'll finish then. So you can't ignore this thing is here and being talked about. I hope I've helped a little bit to understand what sort of it might be. The voluntary sector is central to delivering this, and I think there is an opportunity to shape it through the discussions that are going on now around the GM strategy. But there's no new money. It's new territory. Nobody really knows what to do. And I think probably the VCSE contribution isn't as well articulated yet as it might be. So I'll leave it there, and I'm interested to hear your comments on any of that.